For the past 30 years, he has been pursuing serious experimental and theoretical study of the field of psychoenergetics, which he thinks is a very important part of tomorrow's physics. This is a whole new arena, and he's published over 100 scientific papers and 2 seminal books. With our prompting, and that's Robin and Cody's prompting, Bill has engaged the orb phenomena and will be lending to us the benefits of his research into both the physical and metaphysical aspects. He was a featured scientist in the film What the Bleep Do We Know? And following his presentation, he will be doing a book signing at the ARC, and at the ARC bookstore in the next room. And there's a lot of other great authors there at that bookstore. So thank you very much. We'll welcome William Tiller.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure to be here with you, and thank you very much, Lane. Oh, okay, I'll just use this, good. Minor correction. In my conventional science, I have published about 260 scientific papers and 3 books. And in this new area, it's now about 150 scientific papers and 3 books out, and the 4th one showing in the bookstore, which will be, it's just being printed now, it'll be available in a month. So, orbs. Are they a psychoenergetic phenomenon? And the thing that I find interesting is that if you look at the background picture, what you would see is, yeah, I am going to need a pointer. Oh, it's here, pardon me. That's pretty fast indeed, right. All I have to do is figure out how I'm going to work it. Oh, it's that end, right. Yes. This model that I'll be, you're not going to get very much of it because there isn't time. But the theoretical model I use to quantitatively assess these class of phenomena is something I call a duplex space. There are 2 reciprocal 4 spaces, one of which is space-time, and its conjugate is basically a frequency domain. And so, because of the mathematical connections between such things, if you have a quality in direct space, as space-time, then you can calculate, in principle, the conjugate equilibrium quality in the reciprocal space-time. So basically, I decided to do the situation with a series of gold dots in a spiral form in our direct space-time, and then calculated all this stuff in the background, which is in the reciprocal space-time, an unseen domain for most of us. And it looks remarkably like some of the orbs that we have been talking about. So we'll get to that. Anyway, the thing you need to know is my personal bias as I enter this. It's always sort of been there. To me, we are all spirits having a physical experience as we walk the river of life together, or we ride the river of life together. Our spiritual parents dressed us in these bio-body suits and put us in this playpen that we call a universe in order to grow in coherence, in order to develop our gifts of intentionality, and in order to become what we were intended to become, which is co-creators with our spiritual parents. It's a very long path, but it's a very interesting path, and you will not be bored. So don't think of instant manifestation of all these wonderful things that you will eventually all manifest, and eventually all go through the same process. As you choose. It's free will. There's no growth without free will. Okay, the second thing I want to say, I was asked to speak at this conference by Robin and Cody, not because I had done great experimental work in the Orbs. I haven't. I don't even use a camera, and I don't use a computer. Others do it for me. My wife gets unhappy with me at times because I don't take pictures, but that's the way it is. So, however, Jean and I have been walking this path for, well, we'll be 55 years married next month. And she has been my very valuable partner on the path. Not because she's scientific, but because she's loving and compassionate and she puts up with my crap. But we've had a lot of experience of unseen domains as well as seen domains, and my science has tried to bridge these two. My goal in this lifetime is to build a reliable bridge of understanding that seamlessly joins with conventional science that we've learned over the last 400 years, and passes through the subtle domains, the domains of psychic phenomena. It's also a forest of great entanglement of psychic phenomena, into and through the domains of emotion and mind, and becomes firmly locked in the bedrock of spirit at the other end. And the goal is to build this bridge reliably and in a structurally sound way so that all of our family will want to walk across that bridge. So that's my purpose. Basically, I'm going to break the talk at 3 points. There will be the one at the last, and I'll open it for questions and answers for 5 minutes only each time. And I would ask you that your questions be relevant to the material and that they be concise, because I don't have enough time as is. And if you cannot follow that, I will have to not allow any questions. So be warned. Okay. First thing is, what is psychoenergetic science? All right? Traditional science is the place to start, and the metaphorical reaction equation for traditional science is this mass with arrows back and forth to energy, with the connecting link being the main one. There are many, but the connecting link is Einstein's E equals mc squared. For the last 400 years, traditional science has basically, all of the things we've done can be somehow put into this equation in at least a qualitative way. And the unstated assumption of this since the days of Decayed have been that no human quality of consciousness, intention, emotion, mind, or spirit can significantly influence a well-designed target experiment in physical reality. Now, there has been abundant data for the last 150 years, practically, that there is something going on beyond this, okay? The experiments that we've done show that, in the vernacular of my Russian friend, it's bullshitsky. But it has served a very useful purpose. It served a very useful purpose. And for the last 400 years, using that unstated assumption, the scientific community has structurally built the lowest rung of the ladder of understanding. The work I will talk to you about a little bit is the second rung of the same ladder. And as we move forward, as we ride the river of life, through epochs yet to come, the various rungs of these ladders will be built reliably and quantitatively by perhaps many of you in a future lifetime. So it's important to understand the perspective. I mean, this work was good work, okay? But because the phenomena we're talking about could not be understood within the model that's presently used by traditional science, it's been more comfortable for the scientific community to sweep things under the rug, very much as the priests did in Galileo's time. They would not look through the telescope at the data. It's a very human thing, okay? So I'm saying that our present science is wonderful and inadequate to go forward, all right? So the psychoenergetic science, I think, is the next step. And the next step, in fact, is to take this starting metaphorical equation and add consciousness to it. All right? Now, our dictionaries have a definition of consciousness, meaning awareness, awakeness, so on. It's very, very small in that perspective. I think consciousness is much, much more. It's on par with these in terms of being something unique in the universe. My own personal definition is, my working hypothesis, let us put it that way, is that consciousness is a byproduct of spirit entering dense matter. And as we build ourselves to build infrastructure into the many layers of ourselves, now spirit can attach. And as spirit attaches, we become more conscious. And as we become more conscious, we see things and understand things that we never could see and understand before. And so this bootstrap process goes on. Self-building, more spirit enters, more conscious do we become, more do we see what is behind us, with us, and ahead of us, and so we go forward. Now, I should go back one step, because basically, so I'm asking you not so much to ask what consciousness is. You know, if you ask the question, what's an electron? We don't know the answer to that one either. What is space? We don't know. What is time? We don't know. So the issue is, instead of asking what consciousness is, let us ask what consciousness does. And as soon as you do that, you begin to see, oh, consciousness manipulates information. Whether we're talking about a sum of numbers or multiplication of numbers and so on, the manipulation of numbers, or whether we're taking alphabetical letters and assembling them into words and into sentences, and we see that information in those sentences, whether it's a set of symbols that a mathematician puts together to make a grand equation, like Einstein's E equals mc squared. There's huge information content in those things. And if you're like myself and my wife on a Sunday where it's kind of drab and dull, we pull out a table and get a jigsaw puzzle and put it on the table and start assembling some beautiful picture. So it's all the creation of information. So, and now let me describe why information is the important connecting link here. We've known for the last 60 years, since the days of Shannon and Briowan, that if there is in a process in nature, if there's an information increase, then what that means is that there is a decrease in entropy. There's a decrease in disorder in the universe. And if there's a decrease in disorder, it means you're restoring potential to the universe. It means that there's not going to be a cold death to the universe, as people have thought. Because the potential, once you create information, okay, in our lives, in our processes, then we get this quantity called a change in the entropy. So that instead of entropy increasing in all processes in nature, those that generate information, the entropy actually decreases because you're making more order. And it turns out that this change in information is a negative change in the entropy. It's given by Boltzmann's constant and times a logarithm of the ratio P0 to P1, where P is the number of microscopic distinguishable states in the system. Okay, it's all complex mathematical googly-gook. But nonetheless, it's very meaningful because it allows you to get to numbers. All right? And it becomes quantitative and therefore becomes very, very useful. Actually, you see, it isn't energy that drives the processes in nature. It is we've known for 150 years, it's it's the thermodynamic free energy potential. So we've known this. The master potential is a function. It turns out it's in one of the great men of the last 2 centuries ago is Gibbs, Willard Gibbs, and another Helmholtz. And they have, here's a representation of Gibbs. This is energy. This is pressure times volume minus temperature times entropy. So we see that in this equation, entropy is on par, when you take the temperature into account, on par with energy. So you can begin to see now why information is the appropriate next term in this expanding function. I'll just drop it in. In my view, the term beyond consciousness actually is love. That's the creative force. So, but we won't get into that today. So the point is that in nature, processes can be driven by a change in the free energy. So long as in the process we have a thermodynamic driving force from state 1 or state 0 to state 1, and it's greater than 0, then the process will occur. And so it can occur by changes of energy, changes of pressure, by changes of volume, by changes of temperature, or changes of entropy. And the analogy in your mind is think the following way. In the last century, physicists learned a tremendous amount about nature, fundamental particles in nature, by generating beams of particles and shooting them at targets, which may be other beams going in the other direction. And there's huge explosion of new particles and stuff that they have to track. And out of looking at this fallout, they are able to learn a great deal about particle physics. All right, that's where we are now. And they went through that, but they really worked in this thermodynamic free energy. They worked the energy game. I'm saying now, as we come to the information aspect, and you go deep within yourself, and in our processing, we meditate and we imprint intentions into devices which then can make changes in the world. We can do likewise by going into ourselves and building infrastructure into ourselves. And then spirit enters, etc. So that becomes information. So it's an entirely different way of trying to extract new knowledge of our world and other worlds. But it's working on a different part. It's working on this S part rather than this E part. It's just another way of revealing things in nature, okay? Now, what we have done over the last 10 years or more, we have looked at this unstated assumption and said, if it was ever right, you know, or wrong, it may be different now. And so now let's really check out this unstated assumption of science, that consciousness is not a meaningful experimental variable in our physical world. And so what we did is we designed 4 target experiments. The first one was to take the water of a particular kind. Generally pure water was the easiest way to do it because you can purify it. And the intention was to increase its pH, okay, in equilibrium with air with no chemical additions. And the intention was to increase it by 1 full pH unit, and our measurement accuracy was 1/100th. So the intention was to have a result that was 100 times the noise. You've got to have a lot of faith to do that. The second experiment was to take the same water and reduce the pH by 1 full pH unit, okay, in equilibrium with air. no chemical additions. So up and down, same water, but a different intention, a different experiment. And as you probably know, all biological organisms have an internal pH, well, at least in the blood. But in our case, the stomach acids are very acidic. Other parts of the body are definitely not. So you have to be careful what pH you're talking about. But if you take the pH of blood and you increase it by a half a pH unit, you're probably dying or dead. If you decrease it a half a pH unit, you're probably dying or dead. So 1 pH unit is a lot, okay, for a biological system. And then the third target experiment was to take a particular liver enzyme, alkaline phosphatase, in vitro, and the intention was to raise its thermodynamic activity by just being exposed to, we'll call it a conditioned space, I'll tell you what that means in a minute, for 30 minutes. And then it's analyzed. And then the fourth is to take a living system, an in vivo study of fruit fly larvae, and the intention was to increase the energy storage molecule, ATP, in the cells of fruit fly larvae, compared to its chemical precursor, okay? And the fruit fly larva cells, the ATP and the ADP, the chemical precursor, are the same as in our body, okay? So, and the idea behind that was that if you make if you do that, then you make the larvae more fit. And if they're more fit, they'll have a shorter development time to the adult fly stage. All of these 4 experiments were done, and they were robustly successful. We increased, well, we did the pH of the water up, we did the pH of the water down, we did the alkaline phosphatase, an increase of 25–30% with an exposure of just 30 minutes to a conditioned space. And in the fruit fly larva, the increase of the ATP of the order of 20%, and we reduced the larval development time to the adult fly stage by 25%. And there appears to be a genetic carryover, which we're now studying, which is interesting. Now, how do we introduce the consciousness into the experiment? All right? We basically what we did is we took 4 meditators who sat around a tabletop, and on the tabletop was a simple little low-tech electrical device. It contained a memory system, an EEPROM, and an oscillator oscillating in the megahertz range, and a few diodes, a couple of capacitors and resistors, and a power supply. That's it. And so we would plug the energy converter into the wall socket and plug the converter into this device, which we'll call a UED, an unimprinted electrical device. And we would turn it on, and then the 4 of us would go into meditation. We would connect with each other and with the unseen, and we would mentally try to cleanse the territory of this tabletop and create a kind of sacred space. And when we felt that it was ready, one of us, usually me, who had designed the imprint statement, I would state the imprint statement. And each of the members would hold it in their consciousness at that level of reality, and would hold it for, the timeline is the order of 15 minutes. And when I felt that the device was sort of cooked in a metaphorical sense, I would say, so be it, thy will be done. And then all 4 would just release it, just let it go. And then there would be a subsidiary intention statement, which was designed to seal the primary imprint into the device so that it wouldn't leak away, so that we couldn't do experiments. And then we would usually do that twice, just to be sure. The whole process for a particular one statement, one device, which we now called an IIED, intention imprinted electrical device. We would do it twice. The total time would be maybe something like an hour to an hour and a half. Right? And then what we would do, well, one of the things we learned very quickly when we did this is we would take an unimprinted device and an imprinted device, separate them by 100 meters, turn them off electrically, and see what happened. Well, they're off. There's no electrical energy in them, so there's no way they can communicate with each other, right? Wrong. Within 3 to 5 days, the unimprinted device had picked up the imprint from the imprinted device, and we'd lost that control, which meant we really couldn't do any experiments that would make any sense. And I was having fits. And then I realized, wait a minute. There's another communication channel, information passage channel in the universe that we don't know anything about. Wow. So then one thought about, all right, how am I going to do experiments with this? And I reasoned that, all right, if indeed with it off electrically, somehow this communication is connected maybe with electromagnetic energy. So we wrapped it in aluminum foil to shut out any optical range electromagnetic radiations. And we put it in an electrically grounded Faraday cage, which would basically screen out most of the gigahertz, megahertz, kilohertz frequencies. And we were stuck with a very low frequency range we couldn't do much about, because in order to have a Faraday cage that you could lift and move around, we had to live with that, because it takes a heck of a lot of copper to go into that low range to really screen it. But we then found that by doing this, we could maintain the intention statement in the device for 3 to 6 months. Whew, we could do experiments now. And so the experiments were set up, in fact, in a laboratory in Minnesota, and they were running continuously to get baseline. And we imprinted the devices in the Palo Alto region of California near Stanford. And when they were ready, we would wrap them in foil and do all this stuff. And then we would send them by FedEx, one day, not on separate days, to the laboratory in Minnesota. And they would just plug it into the wall and place the IIED close to the experimental apparatus. Could have been put anywhere in the room, but we thought, let's start with it close. And then we got all these results. So that's the story there, and it says that at least at this point in time, if you do it at least the way that we did it, consciousness can be a very significant variable. And so what this boils down to is, looks like the following. If you're looking at the measurements from one of these experiments, the properties, then you start at, and you're exposing it to this IIED. Generally, you have a baseline, and nothing changes for the order of the first month. And then you start to see some transition, always moving in the direction of the intention. And so the measurement property is going up, and then it plateaus. If you take it away before it gets to the plateau, then it very slowly decays. I mean, very slowly, months. But if you get it up to the plateau, then you can remove the IIED and it stays there. It can stay there for years in some cases. And so it's at this upper level, and usually the magnitude difference between this upper level and this level is very close to your intention, the quantity of the intention. So we see that we're going from our conventional understanding through this domain where things are mixed into a place where new physics is seriously entering. And I don't have time to tell you about it, but basically we then did a bunch of experiments to try to figure out what is some of this? What is this domain? What's going on here? And we learned 3 things from our experiments, or at least the way we interpret them. First one is that we have somehow accessed magnetic monopoles. Now, the world has spent billions of dollars trying to access magnetic monopoles, but from this state of the system, this one is a new state, and magnetic monopoles can coexist with electric monopoles if the electromagnetic gauge symmetry state is raised. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But it's a very important aspect. The second thing we found was that the phenomena, this change, wasn't occurring in the atoms and molecules of this world. They were occurring at another level. They were occurring because of changes in the stuff of the physical vacuum, where there were no electric atom molecules. Okay, so that within, if you look within an atom, okay, we got a nucleus we know of, and we got electron shells and such, depending upon how you want to analyze it, whatever model you want to use. But the issue is there's a huge amount of empty space in there. The stuff that's in that supposedly empty space is what was causing this phenomenon. And the third thing we noticed was there was really an information entanglement between sites that were at this new level of physics, even when they were thousands of miles apart. Okay? Those were sort of the three things that dropped out of it. There are more, but they're sort of secondary. So the bottom line, the way we interpreted this, was that there is a second unique level of physical reality. It's always there. But if it is not coupled to our conventional level of physical reality, we do not detect phenomena going on in that level of reality. All right? It turns out when you come to some theoretical considerations, it's because this stuff appears to be going faster than the velocity of light. And our instruments can only detect things that go slower than the velocity of light. And so if there's no coupling between these two, then it's invisible to you. So this is the beginning of the invisible worlds. Right? And what we do by this use of consciousness to create an IID, the IID conditions the space to be at a higher electromagnetic gauge symmetry state, different than Maxwell equations work on. And so are the instruments that are in this world. All our instruments are in this electric atom molecule world. But there is some stuff that becomes the coupler between these two. And once that stuff is present, it brings about the coupling, and it allows the instruments to access this faster than light phenomena. So that stuff has to bridge between slower than light and faster than light phenomena. Right? Then I'll come to the postulate of that. And it's that aspect that is so important. Okay? Now the second feature that is really important is we decided, well, this aspect is higher gauge symmetry state means it's at a higher thermodynamic potential energy, free energy, than our normal reality. So if we somehow could connect from that level of reality to our normal electric level of reality, we could do useful work of all kinds. All kinds. Mechanical, chemical, electrical, optical, etc. And so then I thought, what if when we're born in this bio-bodysuit I talk about, into this realm, there is an organ or a system in the body that is at this higher gauge symmetry level? If that were the case, then human intention, and when I didn't say this, okay, we got these two worlds. Human intention affects this world, not this one, not our familiar one, or at least not much, but it can affect this one big time. And so if they're coupled together and the instruments measure the sum of those two effects, it can measure the intention effects. And so we did the same kind of experiment with respect to the magnetic aspect in humans. We did muscle testing with a world-class expert and then brought one of these little bar magnets into the muscle group being tested, and the South Pole increased the strength and the North Pole decreased the strength. Well, you cannot have that kind of behavior in our normal reality because all you have there are magnetic dipoles. So again, it's accessing magnetic monopoles, magnetic currents in the human body, which the intention of a human can drive. Okay? In my modeling, it drives and creates flows of magnetoelectric energy. The general other way of putting it, it creates an enhancement of chi and the flow of chi, which we've all heard about. And so this is what makes the great performers of the world. All right? They unconsciously work with this within themselves through their intention, through their desire, through their feeling state to make something important happen. And all the great performers of the world, I think, unconsciously do this. But now that we begin to know about it, everybody can do this. If we can bring some kind of biofeedback device, and we have something on we're developing to do that, which you can set in front of you and you can look at it and you can intend and you can measure the increase in this energetic state by your intentions. And as you pump that kind of iron in your internal gym, then you change from a normal individual to an adept, from an adept to a master, and from a master to an avatar. All of us have the internal apparatus to be capable of doing that. And in so doing, we will bridge these other domains. Because nature is radiating all the time on many, many bands. We are only really detect with our sensory system, the 5 physical senses, and our instruments, the electromagnetic band. And the other aspects of the 4 fundamental forces, but basically that band. But as you do this work within and you build yourself, then you begin to access these other bands. And of course, Orbs is all about that kind of stuff. Okay, I get carried away, so forgive me. Let's move on. All right, so the bottom line is that this is the way I see it. I think this is the way it is. That relative to these 2 levels, any measurement, any quality that we measure is given by our electric atom molecule level, that's our conventional reality, plus this coupling coefficient alpha effective times the magnitude of what the measured value will be in this vacuum level of reality. And so if we don't have any coupling or much coupling, if this is very small, then you can just forget that. You just have your normal reality. But if you use your consciousness to create this stuff that becomes the coupler, then this term goes up to the order of 1. That's a badly written thing, but basically the order of 1. Then you access all of this. Okay? So these are the definitions of the various terms. Deltron, I had to invent this substance from the domain of emotion and having the qualities that it can go slower than light or faster than light, and the slower than light part can interact with the electric stuff, and the faster than light part can interact with the magnetic information wave stuff. And that allows this whole system to work. And so that's still a postulate, but it allows us to explain all these phenomena that we are finding. Okay. Now we've also devised an experimental measurement system. We not only have a source that can lift the gauge symmetry state, we have a detector which will tell us how much the thermodynamic free energy excess is for the hydrated proton. That's just a hydrogen atom in water. But it reads it out to us. So we can begin to see that. This is in some of the sites around the U.S. that we've made measurements. The numbers they're relevant. They're in milli-electron volts. I'll come to a more meaningful statement. Here's one from within our laboratory in Payson. This one, P7 and P1. And here's one in England, and here's one in Italy. Now, we've used this device to do measurements in various alternative and complementary medicine laboratories. We've used it at Eric Pearl's Reconnective Healing workshop. We've only done it once. We'll be doing another more exact experiment in a couple of months. But in the 1 month, what we did do is that we measured, and it took place here in Sedona, we measured the increase in this excess thermodynamic free energy from the day that the process started, and we saw an increase to a peak, and then it just decayed after the workshop was over. I won't tell you all the details, but the difference in the magnitude between the peak and the starting place was a doubling of the average energy in the space. Now, what does that mean? If I were to say I had a normal space and I was going to increase the temperature, how much would I have to increase it to make that change equivalent to what was seen in this experiment? And the change was 300 degrees centigrade. Wow. And there was no change in the measurement temperature. So the thermodynamic free energy changed, but the temperature did not. And it was not in the usual form. It could be indeed entropic. We don't know those details yet. But it's a significant effect. We have, in certain sites around the country, we've conditioned them to a place where it's 3 times the average temperature. So the equivalent of like 900 degrees centigrade. That quantity of energy that's in the molecules in the normal level of reality, because it's the temperature that is the indicator of how much kinetic energy is stored in the molecule. So it's a big effect, can be a very big effect. Well, I think I've said this, that basically the bottom line is that the human consciousness is capable of allowing us to couple to another level of reality. And this level of reality may have its own set of life forms. And we may be able to image them through things like digital cameras. Digital is interesting because there's much more information content in the digital than in the analog. So, anyway, again, it's this. Let's see, have I gone... Oh, I know what I'm missing. This is where I'm going to take the first 5-minute break so you can ask some questions if you wish. And there are microphones at the back. I repeat, make them relevant, make them concise, please. And if you will cut me off in 5 minutes. So you're going to have to get up and come to the mic. You're first, so let's go.
Before the aluminum foil Faraday cage solution to the problem, how did you know that the second imprintable device had been contaminated by the first?
We looked at the water experiment. You can immediately know if it's conditioned, if the device is conditioned, because just in the behavior of the pH versus time curves. If you use an unimprinted device, they are really jerky and they displace from each other over time. Whereas in the conditioned one, they're just beautifully smooth, rising, and they're all, over a number of days, they're all sequenced day by day. So we'd had that experience, and that was our indicator. And then basically, we were able to do experiments like this with the unimprinted device, and we got effects. So there was a lot of that, but in terms of, down to the very nitty-gritty, it was just so obvious to us that the conditioning had changed.
Would you please define gauge symmetry state?
Oh, this is very hard, okay? I've laid it out in the various books, and these experiments, by the way, are written up in detail in Conscious Acts of Creation and also in some Science Adventures with Real Magic, because it was the Science Adventures with Real Magic is where we did the replication experiment on the water with the IIED pH going up by 1 full unit. The electromagnetic gauge symmetry state going up is, one way to see it is, in our normal reality, the undetermined parameter is the phase angle of the electron wave function. It can have any value in a circle, okay? The issue is when you raise the gauge symmetry state from what's called the U1 to the SU2 level, where you have coexistence of electric monopoles and magnetic monopoles, you now have this electron, let's say, moving in this orbit. It has its phase angle. Now you've introduced the coupling with the magnetic monopole. It takes a perpendicular orbit because now the two are coupled. So now there are two undetermined parameters. And because there are two, that becomes the 2 in the SU2 gauge symmetry state. It's lifted to a level where now you have a much more complex dance of the charged particles. And There are many other ways that I can say this, but that's the simplest that I've come up with. The way you can think of it is the following. If you look in that space between a nucleus and the electrons, all right, in an atom, and you bring about the coupling, so the stuff in the vacuum, the supposedly empty space, the magnetic monopoles start to circulate. And now, with our present devices, we see the paths of the electron changing, or the probability of them being in certain places changing. And so you say somehow there's an attractor that's developed. And people call it dark matter and dark energy, but it really is the magnetic monopole in this vacuum stuff that's doing it. And so the gauge, it says you now have a system richer, and it's a higher gauge symmetry state, and it's more complex. And because it's more complex, it is at a higher thermodynamic free energy per unit volume.
Thank you for saying that in the simplest way possible.
Yes. I'll just drop it in. When I don't understand things well, I can only say them in a complicated way. When I eventually get to understand them well, I can make it simple, but this one is tough for anyone. Next. Let's take one over here.
What is the response of mainstream science to this type of experimental
mainstream
approach?
science are a reincarnation of the priests of Galileo's time. They choose not to look through the telescope with an open eye. It would be wonderful. I would just love it if they would just take the time to seriously look. But they're boggled by this. They're still stuck with the issue of the unstated assumption. And poor guys or girls, it's just the way it is for them. They will change. I mean, these things always change, but it may take 20, 30, 40 years. One funeral at a time. That's what Mach said. Yep. Mach was right about that. Sorry, say it again.
In terms of the words you were using, consciousness,
yes,
and intent,
yes,
where does the body, brain, mind, thought, and consciousness, as you're using
well,
them?
the consciousness, as I'm using it, it's really outside of the electric atom molecule body, the layer in the biobody suit. Our unconscious that functions and is the dominant thing in our biobody suit, it primarily functions at the magnetic information wave level, which is the layer inside the body. My view of the whole person is like a sphere with 3 segmented zones in it. The outer zone is made of 2 layers, electric monopole substance and magnetic information wave substance, and that's what we take on when we're born. That's what we shuck off when we seem to die. The middle zone is the soul self. That's really what's evolving. That's pretty much fairly indestructible. And that's the emotion domain, the mind domain, and an aspect of the spirit domain. And the core is the high spirit domain, the creator, or the God self. So we are all those things. And it's a question of developing the coherence of information passage from one to the other. I mean, the biobody suit, the outer layer is well designed in order to interface with space-time phenomena through the 5 physical senses, developed by what is a horse there now? That's interesting. Where'd that come from?
Just close that up. Just close that. Close it, Josh.
So in any event, I sort of lost my train of thought, so have I answered your question?
Bill?
Yes.
I just want you to know that the 5 minutes that you asked for is up if you want to...
Sorry, I think I need to go on,
yes,
because will you sit down and maybe you can be first up the next time, the next break, and you can ask your question then. But you may have more questions too. So let me go forward. You know, we could talk all day, but we don't have time. The model that I use is this duplex model, and the way I see it or visualize it, and I had 2 pictures, but the other one doesn't come out. So here is space-time representation of a quality, and behind it is the reciprocal space-time. It's a conjugate. So, and it's really a reciprocal space So it's 1 over distance and 1 over time. And 1 over distance is number per unit distance. So it's a spatial frequency. And 1 over time is number per unit time. It's a temporal frequency. So this bio-bodysuit, the bio aspect, has 2 layers. We really only know about this one, and this other layer is waiting for us to get seriously in touch with it. And so if you have a frequency domain, okay, let me go one step. If you go back and if you have a quality, or like an object in direct space, it has an equilibrium conjugate information pattern in reciprocal space. And so if you couple these 2 together, then this pattern builds up in reciprocal space. Once it is truly in reciprocal space, you can access it from anywhere, here or Mars or Saturn or anywhere in the world, because it's in a frequency domain. Is not limited by distance nor time. And if the higher dimensional ones, which are behind this duplex reference frame is embedded in a higher frame, the domain of emotion, the domain of mind, and an aspect of the spirit domain. So these are dimensions. This one becomes sort of an 8 space, not quite, but I don't want to get into the details. And then a 9, and then a 10, etc. These, if they're all frequency domains, then an intention from this level gives a pattern in the frequency domain, and you can have a resonance in this domain, and a resonance in this domain, and therefore a resonance in this domain. And if you have the deltron coupler, it's in this domain. So this is how, with intention, can come from the highest aspect of yourself, the spirit level, and ultimately manifest in the earth. So, and I'm sorry I don't have the other one, but it basically is you can put this into what's called a band diagram. But let me pass by. Let me give you an example of an individual with a remarkable human biofield. Some work I did back in the 1970s with a man by the name of Stano. He wasn't a doctor. In fact, the work that we did together, he got a PhD for it in psychology at the International College in Los Angeles. So he has been a practicing psychologist for many years. He's retired now too. This was the mid-70s. The equipment was, he would sensitize a camera with his biofield. That is, he would hold it, he would take it to bed with him, sleep with it, kind of thing, do this for a couple of days, and then he could get remarkable pictures. And this was not a digital camera. And so he put the camera on a tripod with a shutter release, he used Kodak film and Kodak processing. And then when he showed me this, and I thought, this is pretty interesting stuff. And so I said, okay, let's do a dual camera set of experiments. One which was sensitized and one which was not sensitized, so that we could get the normal and we could get the altered normal. I'm going to show you what these things look like. They're in the first chapter of my first book, Science and Human Transformation. So here we can see people on the stage with these things rising from the chairs and from the people. And here, this was a rock concert out in the air, and you can see these little, look like seahorses on contrails. And you can see all this energy being generated. It basically was a dark system. So I guess you have to be pretty close to see the contrails, but I can see them here. And I thought they were really very interesting, and now I think they're very much related to orbs. And here, so that was 30 years ago. So basically, where am I? Here it is. And then these were some other pictures that he'd taken. And I think of that as an open book that's sort of flying in the room. And he's got a friend. It was a friend's birthday, and he was taking a picture of him in front of this. And you got all this other stuff. And here's more of the same. And by that time, I said, hey, let's do a dual camera experiment. And so the one on the left, is the unsensitized camera. Unfortunately, we couldn't get the same kind of camera. They no longer made it of the kind he had, which was a plastic Kodak. And this was a Minolta camera. So this is the unsensitized. It's a faster shutter than this one. But you can see, if you can look back here at this man, you can see right through his body and see the things on the wall behind it, and he's getting pretty transparent. If you go to the bottom one, here's Uri Geller on stage with a couple of ladies and a blackboard. And here you can see some stuff going between one of these ladies and Uri, and you can see through half of his body to the blackboard. And here, this was at a conference I was at with Doris Kubler-Ross down in Monterey. And so here's the Minolta, and you can see the light wells, and here is the Kodak. This stuff, these beams, these bands, these ribbons of light manifesting. And here in the bottom, he could take pictures with a lens cap on the camera. And this was in the church at Stanford inside, and this was with the lens cap off, and this was with the lens cap on. Yeah. Very interesting stuff. And Stan's primary intention was to reveal God's universe. He was a marvelous man of the Baha'i faith, and he was really built inside. And so his biofield, and he could basically, once he sensitized anyone's camera, and he passed it to them, then maybe for the first hour they could take pictures and they would get good results. But the entanglement with other things, it eventually leaked away. But when he was there using the shutter release, his biofield kept working with the camera and kept lifting its gauge symmetry state. That's how I see it anyway. And I think so he lifted the gauge symmetry state to this SU2 level of seemingly an inert object in front of him. And that becomes very important when we say a little bit later about the placebo effect in medicine. Because they also assume that things are inert, inert, inert. That's also Bolshevsky. Anyway, I wanted to say something about this, but basically I don't think I have time, and I'm going to pass over it, but I think you should at least hear it. I'll read it. Every change in the human physiological state is accompanied by an appropriate change in the mental emotional state, conscious or unconscious. And conversely, every change in the mental emotional state, conscious or unconscious, is accompanied by an appropriate change in the physiological state. And this is why biofeedback works so well. And I had 3 wonderful experiments and some interesting data, but another time. So this duplex reference frame that I talk about, I want to say a little bit, just a tiny bit about it. They are reciprocals, and so the coordinates are not distance and time, they are frequencies. And I can label them with numbers k. They would be wave numbers in solid-state physics. And there is a reciprocal mirror with this thing, and it comes through the mathematics, that there is a quality in one, and there's a reciprocal quality in the other. Which can be remarkable in the sense that from, let's say, here is the origin in direct space, and Alpha Centauri is quite a distance away in direct space. Well, Alpha Centauri in the reciprocal space has a low frequency. It's in the very low frequency domain of reciprocal space, and the origin here is at infinity in reciprocal space. So if you have that kind of loop, you see, you gain an entirely different perspective on things. And ultimately, we have a sensory system latent within us which allows us to access that reciprocal space. And we will do that as we go forward into our future. That's my working hypothesis. I have these intuitive things, and they're working hypotheses until I've proven them experimentally. And then I think we can accept them as being real. But that's a requirement, at least for me as a scientist. So what we see are the subluminal electric particles in the direct space and the magnetic information waves going faster than light in reciprocal space. Now both of these come in when you want to talk about de Broglie's particle pilot wave picture, which was really the cornerstone of quantum mechanics. And so you have a particle and you have a pilot wave which is supposedly guiding it. He won the Nobel Prize for this concept and some of the mathematics that went with it. Now, the interesting thing is when you apply simple quantum mechanics and relativity theory to this, you find that the product, mathematical product of the particle velocity, which is always slower than light, and the wave components which make up this pilot wave, that has to equal c squared, the velocity of light squared. And since the particle velocity must always be less than c, that means the magnetic information wave components must always be greater than c. All right? So that has hung there since the 1930s. And the physicists of the day said, oh, we're going to have problems with relativity unless we call them information waves, because information can't really do anything. However, what I try to tell you in the beginning is that information waves make negative entropy, and negative entropy is in the thermodynamic free energy function, and it's the thermodynamic free energy function that governs all processes in nature. So they were wrong, but the magnitude of the effect is so small it couldn't be detectable in their instruments. But now, at this point in time, when we look at it, it says, hey, here is something which is going faster than light, and it has to be interacting with the particle in order to be a particle pilot wave. And it turns out people doing quantum mechanics, Walter Harrison at Stanford, his book says, if you can assume the existence of particle and wave, you can calculate everything in today's quantum mechanics, all the predictions. And so the old concept in quantum mechanics is the wave-particle duality. That is, that somehow this stuff can, on some occasions, act like a particle, on other occasions act like a wave. Well, if they're simultaneous in this kind of format, and you bring in a coupler, now consciousness can couple with the coupler, and now you can see how consciousness comes into the rock bottom building block of the expanded quantum mechanics, and you can begin to see how everything can start to make sense. Slower than light, faster than light stuff. In essence, what happens is the magnetic information waves have to be coming in the components, like from this side, and they pass through this, which is a moving wave packet that's moving at the velocity of the particle. But the things that make it up are waves coming in to it, new waves, and old waves going out. That's the way it works. So that's where we're going in the future, and here's the issue of just a little piece of this mirror principle. So we have positive energy particle to the velocity of light. Can't go up to the velocity of light because it's got mass and therefore it takes an infinite amount of energy if it went that far. But the mirror principle part is the pilot wave branch, the magnetic information wave branch. Comes from minus infinity and keeps going. And it means that quality in one domain has a conjugate quality in the other. And so here you have gravity, there you have levity. So here it's positive energy, there it's negative energy. So there's whole kinds of things that we now can begin to explain or rationalize. It's not until there's experimental proof. Got to be careful. So let's see, what have I got here? I think, all right, I think we've done that. The issue of, we see in our experiments that when we have a part of our system, experimental system, in the case of the water pH, we do an experiment in our laboratory. Young people in Milan, Italy, wanted to do some work with us, and we said, okay, buy this equipment and set up this measurement system for measuring pH. And we will not send you an IID, we just want you to do background for 3 months and then we'll send you one. Well, within a week of them setting up their apparatus, they began getting the same kind of results that we were doing in the Payson laboratory, which was conditioned. So there was information entanglement over 6,000 miles. And the way that this particular thing is meant, the way it's meant is that you can have, should have, these are the two sheets looking at our electric atom molecule world in this one and the magnetic information wave world in this one. And you start with the measurement apparatus here and the measurement apparatus there, but this one will never have an IED, but this one has an IED with it, which now produces coupling between these two, and so the information pattern gets into reciprocal space. And once it's in reciprocal space, it's everywhere. So it's right outside this one in Milan, and now thermodynamic equilibrium requires that because there is coupling here, there's a trickle of deltrons across here, and then a trickle becomes a stream and then becomes a flood, and before you know it, this becomes a totally coupled region as well, and thus the information generated here goes 6,000 miles away. Doesn't have to be through space-time, doesn't have to be electromagnetism. The data suggests it's not electromagnetism. Anyway, this is, if we happen to have some time, I'll get back to this. But you can using, oh, that's even worse. But the issue is, yeah, the issue is that you can begin to be quantitative. You can begin to predict things, and it was to help you understand the placebo effect and a variety of other things. I didn't mean to scare you, but I realized as I was going over my notes that I'm just never going to try to explain it simply. But we'll see. Maybe there'll be time, but I doubt it. Anyway, there was an article in Science magazine by the man by the name of Ensrich, and he pointed out that in 15 years earlier, double-blind experiments with obsessive compulsive disorder showed a placebo response of the order of 15%. Very, very little. However, 15 years later, in 1999, the same experiment done in many places had a placebo response now 75 to 80%. And of course, pharmaceutical companies they don't like this. And academicians like to sweep that under the rug because it can't be understood easily in the conventional framework. And so they did. But the issue is, we have to ask ourselves, why has the magnitude of the placebo effect increased so remarkably in 15 years? In the same time frame, we might also ask, why in the last 15 years have we detected that there's acceleration out at the edge of the expanding universe, not contraction? And why have we started to see dark matter effects and dark energy effects in the last 15 to 20 years? So the possibility is that the concentration of this coupler substance is perhaps increasing in our local universe. And it's been increasing for some decades, so that this coupling coefficient alpha effective is becoming larger. And as it becomes larger, everything starts to be linked together. We start to be connected more and more. And we begin to see the attractor aspect of the reciprocal space stuff on the direct space stuff, which, because of the reciprocal nature, the mirror principle aspect, we will see the kind of phenomena people are starting to talk about. It's nice to think about because it may be relevant very much to orbs for us here. It's not proof, but it's internally self-consistent with the kinds of phenomena that has been occurring. Well, this related to the mathematics I had. So the issue, though, well, okay, I'm going to say something that relates to this double-blind studies because of an inert object actually becomes a very dynamic thing through this information entanglement. And, okay. This is in the magic book, Some Science Adventures with Real Magic. I came to realize that the fundamental, the simplest communication system that we have, if you're a practitioner and you have a client, you think that's all it is, but it's not. You also may have a device. You may be doing electrodermal measurements. But you also have gauge symmetry state of the space that you two are interacting through, and you also have the unseen universe that may be involved or may not be involved in it. So if you're lifting the gauge symmetry state, you and the client are very much coupled, and the value of the effects that occur in that interaction depend very much upon the phase angle of electron wave functions and magnetic monopole wave functions when you have lifted the gauge symmetry state. If it's not lifted, you're in the U1 state and you have less to work with. Let me say something about why this is so important. And I call it the garage inventor effect. Okay? There's this guy with a tolerant wife, and he has a garage, and he wants to do some free energy experiments in the garage to make efficiencies greater than 1 for a device. And his wife lets him go to the garage in the evenings, and he works assiduously on this, and he works on it for years. And because he is so intent and focused on that, he is broadcasting in his biofield into this garage. And after a couple of years, he suddenly starts to getting the effects, and he gets the effects, and they're stronger and stronger, and he says, wow. So he calls all his friends in and demonstrates to them that it's real. And they think, this is terrific. Let's make a business. And one of them said, well, wait a minute, before we rush to doing that, we should have this tested in a testing lab. Okay, and there's one in the next town. And so they send the equipment there to the testing lab, and a month later the data comes back, and it's just normal. And the guy in the testing lab wonders, is this guy trying to perpetrate a fraud, et cetera, et cetera. And the thing they didn't realize was, in fact, that they did not replicate the gauge symmetry state of the space. In order for that laboratory to make any money in the real conventional world, it had to be a U1 gauge space. So it wasn't conditioned to an SU2, and the gauge space is part of the system. Hal Puthoff in Texas is very proud of the fact that 35 individuals, supposedly these special devices with efficiencies greater than 1, that he's tested, and none of them passed the test. And the reason is his laboratory is a U1 gauge laboratory, not an SU2 gauge laboratory. Makes a big difference. So if you're in this game of working in your garage you have a patient wife, you need to remember that that's a very important part of the system. See, the system can be remarkable at these levels. I mean, we found this by these Italian folks and the folks in England wanting just to get involved somehow. But as soon as we agreed, they were part of our system. And because they're part of our system, they became coupled because of the reciprocal space aspect or vectors. And that's what's in the mathematics. And that makes it very difficult. Because you can see the information entanglement always is there when you bring in this reciprocal space. And if you think in terms of a simple medical experiment with a doctor and a treatment and a placebo, the system is these 3 parts. Okay, in the reciprocal space aspects, you have an amplitude and a phase angle effect, but really what you can experimentally measure and what is manifest is the intensity, and that's the square of the amplitude. And in order to get that, you have to multiply the sum of these 3 vectors times the sum of the complex conjugate, just same amplitude but mirrored phase angle effect. And when you do, you get the kind of part, you get a mathematical thing with 2 terms in it, one which is just what you'd normally have if they weren't vectors, they're just scalar quantities. But then you get a complex thing which is the entanglement, information entanglement, and it's always the pair, the doctor and the treatment, plus the doctor and the placebo, plus the treatment and the placebo. They're multiplied together, and so you cannot separate the treatment from the placebo in this kind of duplex space where they're coupled together. And it's that as the coupling coefficient goes up, the placebo effect goes up. It just drops out of the mathematics. So that's important to realize, and it's important for everyone to realize that these 5 parts are part of the system. And I put this thing in with the device. For example, if you're a practitioner doing electrodermal testing on people, the biofield of the practitioner gets embedded, the deltrons from that get embedded in the device, and the device eventually has a lifted gauge symmetry state from this, and now these 2 things are a hybrid system. And they can access information in the universe that is not capable of being accessed when they're in the separated state. Really important. And it really is relevant when we want to talk about orbs and digital camera. It's the same system, except now we have an experimenter and we have a camera and we have orbs as the client. And so the issue is that the camera, just like in Stan Ojak's case, can become potentized through the biofield of the practitioner or the biofield of the world. And digital cameras doesn't take as much to make it happen. Okay, some people can see these things. Stan would be able to see these things with his eyes because his biofield is so tremendous that he doesn't need training wheels to see these things, experience them. And there are a variety of humans that are that way. So it's a question of how far do things have to be pushed, you know, to lift the camera to the place where it can manifest in supposedly an inert thing, like a camera, something from another dimension. All right? Which I think is what orbs are. And so if the involved, of course, are the biofield of the individual, the biofield of the conditioning of the space, the help of the unseen, yes or no, etc., and the eventual conditioning of the camera you use so that it's easier to get the phenomena you are desiring. And of course, if you're dealing with a conscious biological entity that wants to cooperate in the uplift of these slow humans, this world, not very advanced, then of course you'll see all kinds of interactions. And down the road, the possibility of really doing meaningful things with that bridge, that is very likely to get traditional scientists out of the box. And because it's the issue of the information entanglement. So it is the two levels and the higher levels of reality that become coupled. And once they become uncoupled, then they're entangled. The mathematics of the dual or triple system, etc., is entangled. And now, with enough of the coupler, you can have instruments which can bridge. And so you can begin to see these things. And you can begin to become part of the whole, which is what we are at the core level. Okay? So, I don't think they're creatures of space-time. And I think when Klaus shows you some of the dual camera experiments he's done, you will agree. I won't steal his thunder. But it's great. And basically because if I postulate that the higher dimensions are also frequency domains, okay, then you can have resonance. And so if you can have resonance and their frequencies, then they can be everywhere. They can do all these things we think about as these higher dimensional reality and these higher dimensional beings and UFOs and so on, who've learned the physics of how to deal between these things. Then you can find ways to reveal them. Once you open your mind to the meaning of these things, your unconscious will find ways to feed you kernels of information small enough that you can digest. Okay. Can I have 5 minutes? Are we done?
Yeah, 5 minutes.
5 minutes for questions. Come on, guys. As you join information systems, now it's a higher order information, so there's more entropy effect, etc. And as you do these things at higher dimensional levels, the reason it's a very small magnitude effect at the electric atom molecule level is because the change is multiplied by Boltzmann constant. It's very small. I think the next level is up at least 10 orders of magnitude, the corresponding one. And the higher level, still higher. So you go high enough that you now speak a word and you move a mountain. I mean, I think it's all built into this kind of system. Okay? Next.
Hi. One difficult experimental aspect of this is measuring the amount of intent that you put into a device.
Sure is tough.
Would it be possible to take photographs along the line of the orb photographs and try to put intent into the device through orbs?
Yes, we're already talking about that.
Monitor it that way? Okay.
Klaus and I. So tune in to Klaus's time goes on. Yeah, thanks. Young lady?
In your study, I didn't quite get the act of the quartz crystal after you turned it to 90 degrees.
Yeah, that's very interesting because it says that quartz crystal was a tuner. In essence, that was what I pulled out of that. This is in Chapter 6 of Conscious Acts of Creation book. And the thing we found was that we had a line of measuring instruments that were measuring the oscillations in temperature in the room outside of a Faraday cage with a water bottle and a measurement of pH and temperature in the water. And eventually when it was at condition, we were able to remove that, and we still saw the oscillations. They decayed very, very slowly, and they had a certain waveform. And as we put the quartz crystal in the place where the Faraday cage had been, and we put the C-axis upwards, okay, whereas the line of thermistors were along there over an 11-foot dimension. When you did this, it turns out that the amplitude of the oscillation increased slightly, and the decay rate decreased maybe a factor of 5, so very slowly decayed, like over months. But then if we just laid it down, so the C-axis was pointing along the line of the thermistors, almost immediately the waveform inverted, the amplitude was reduced by a factor of 2, and the frequency was increased by a factor of 5, something like that. But it was instantaneous. And so rather than its normal decay rate, I came away from that saying, we'll get back to this, and that's going to be a tuner procedure. So anyway, next over here. A little louder, please.
I don't think it's on. Oh, excuse me for my layman terms, but my brother-in-law has an earthquake machine. He measures...
Is that relevant to this subject that I talked about?
He measures earthquakes with this sensitive machine, and
Yes.
I've tried to ask him about measuring electromagnetic fields around person, but he says he can't.
No.
Is that because the instrument isn't
The
advanced enough?
No, the instrument is designed to measure sound waves, basically. I mean, that's what propagates through the earth when there are earthquakes.
So he believes people don't have them, so what would be my answer perspective?
Well, the issue are two things. Whenever an electromagnetic wave is generated in a person, you also generate a sound wave because most of the tissues are piezoelectric, which means that a sound vibration will give rise to an electric signal, and an electric signal will give rise to a sound signal. So he can convert his instrument to make it also measure electric signals. So that would be the path he would have to follow to do this. But it takes you're now talking about a lot of instrumentation and detection equipment. In principle,
So it's just an adjustment of his machines, and then
not a
he'd be able
simple
to
not a simple adjustment.
Okay.
I mean, if I were he and I could just turn a knob, I'd be happy. But I'd probably have to take the whole thing apart and rebuild it with the other intention in mind.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, Professor. I just read a book.
A little louder, please.
Yeah.
Not on?
Is it on?
Is it? Go ahead. Try again.
Matrix energetics. And
Matrix
preface,
energetics.
I saw some pages from
right.
that. So,
I wrote the foreword.
what's your opinion about belief system and intention, how it affects actually this invisible world?
The limb system?
Belief system.
Oh, belief system.
Yeah, because...
belief is terribly important. I mean, the issue is we've got to come to realize that nature responds in 3 ways, or can respond in 3 ways. What you get from nature is if you have no bias at all, you get a certain set of phenomena responses. If you have a positive bias, you get an expanded set. If you have a negative bias, your biofield is diminishing the effect and is changing it. So this is something we just have to realize. As you start bringing consciousness into it, you have to realize that the mindset that you hold, your belief system, is in fact being broadcast from you in your biofield all the time, and through reciprocal space part of yourself as well. So the ball game is different. And so in the experimental design, one is to say, all right, we're going to do it this time with a neutral bias. No bias, just suspend judgment, suspend belief. And then we're going to do it okay with belief. And that can vary depending upon how strong your belief is. Okay? And then we're going to do it like Randy would. Okay? Be very negative about it. Just the Boggle effect is zero. You can't possibly be tolerated, etc.
These next two questions will be the last.
Okay. This lady is
this
next,
lady
and then I'll come to the red-haired lady. Okay,
yes,
please. Please put it on.
My question is about the human biofield and people like Stan who affect the cameras so amazingly. Is that genetic in your opinion, or do you think anyone can raise their vibration through spiritual? Well, there
are genii in every field. We know that. We'll accept that. All of us have the apparatus to do it. Okay? He had to work. He practiced and prayed and did all these wonderful things for many, many, many years of his life in order to manifest these abilities. So it is a possibility for every single one of us. Now, at every layer of self, we radiate. The easiest one for us to pick up in today's world with today's instruments is the electromagnetic part of the biofield. That can be done straightforwardly. Equipment is expensive and complex, but still can be done. The next level will be this magnetic information wave level. I call it magnetoelectric energy. And then there'll be higher levels, and they're all manifested in our biofield. People who are good at seeing auras will see shells around yourself, etc. So it's all there. We'll get better and better at it as we go forward. But you have to give these things a meaning, because it's the unconscious that does most of the work. Okay? If your mind doesn't give a thing a meaning, then your unconscious will not feed you information to enrich your understanding of these things. Okay? Last one.
I wanted to ask you if you've done any experimentation with the concept of the multisensory human and the five-sensory human in respect to the right brain activity and the left brain activity. And when you're a multisensory person, you use right brain before left brain, and then you talk through the right brain to the left brain and manifest.
That kind of thing is all beginning to be a doable thing.
Yes.
So people who are expert in that, as they open up to this other level, because the magnetic information wave level is the template for the growth in the electric level. And so we now have the capability to meaningfully start doing experiments to answer your question.
Because I work with this level in my daily work, and what I've seen, because I can see through the body and I see the brain and how it works, it's connected to the DNA.
Right.
And the energy helix of the DNA connected to the two physical walls is actually the energy level in the right brain goes through the DNA, and then it goes through the physical side.
All right. That's your theory.
Yes.
And I accept theory.
Right.
But the issue is that the instruments you're using can only see the electric atom molecule aspect of this. So truth is in the experiment, and where we can screw up is in our interpretation. So you have to be very careful not to get too far ahead of that circumstance. But I think we'll see in the next decade a tremendous growth in the possibility of doing the things you're talking about when you bring this other into it. Yeah. I'm certainly talking to people involved with brain state management, and we're talking on these levels of how to get at these things experimentally and how to get at them from a theoretical perspective. So we haven't gone very far yet, but we've made a beginning. Thanks very much.
All right. Let's give Mr. Tiller a hand.